Howdy, everybody. This is Omar, your audio amigo, and welcome to another episode of the Headphone Hoedown. This year, KiwiEars decided to make a splash and join the over-ear headphone market in a big way. From the budget-minded Division to the more premium Athea, they have released 6 headphones in the span of the last 6 months, and now Zeos has entered the chat to make it 7. These are the new KiwiEars X Z Reviews Serene, a budget closed-back planar magnetic headphone priced at $160 US. This configuration at this price is quite rare, and for good reason, but KiwiEars and Zeos think that they've cooked up something rather special here. Are these proof that you don't need to spend $300-400 to get a good pair of closed-back planars, or is this just another data point in the long list of potentially problematic-sounding closed-back planars? Well, let's find out. As usual, quick disclaimer, these were sent to me by Linsoul for review. I'm not being paid for this review, but because I could turn around and sell these if I wanted to, I've gone ahead and activated the paid promotion feature here on YouTube. I do these disclaimers because I believe in full transparency when there's potential bias besides my own personal tastes at play. Thank you so much to Linsoul for sending me this set, and thanks to all of you watching for your continued support. Being a budget planar headphone, I expected the unboxing experience to be a little bit more Spartan, and I was correct. Inside this box, you will find the headphones, the cable, and that's it. Normally, I would be okay with this. Other budget options at this price point, however, give you a carry bag or a carry pouch or a 1/4-inch adapter. I understand people tend to have drawers full of 1/4-inch adapters, but not including things that other budget options have is kind of stingy here. I do understand what they're doing. They put all of their money into this driver and this tuning, so this level of packaging and accessories is common on KiwiEars as well as other headphones. I'm not going to knock it too much here. The cable, on the other hand, is something that I absolutely will knock them on. At first glance, it's not too bad. The cloth braiding is soft. The cables, will sit flat relatively easily. It has no memory. The connectors are standard 3.5mm on both ends. The connectors are also metal, which is nice. The amp connector isn't branded or anything. It's just sort of plain featureless black. But the Y-split is this nice little round thing that has both KiwiEars and Zeos branding on it, which is nice to see. The dual 3.5mm connectors are stereo indicated rather nicely, but there's no color on them, which y'all know I would prefer. Honestly, this is all fine. This is an under $200 headphone. The cable is suitable, or at least it would be if it wasn't one of the most microphonic cables I have ever used. And since these headphones are very plasticky and very lightweight, you will hear this all the time. At least in my experience, this was noticeable even at mild to moderate listening volumes. I respect Zeos and KiwiEars trying to give us a nice cable, but if you have a beard or you wear collared shirts or you go on a walk with this headphone, the microphonics are going to be a huge problem. Zeos himself has acknowledged this, so I know that he knows, but I'm still going to point it out. The build quality here on the Serene is not great. These have a very plasticky, sort of clicky-clacky sound to them. The headband at least appears to be mostly plastic. I heard there is a metal bar that goes here across the top, which is nice, but it doesn't help the sound that these cups have. There is a glued-on comfort pad here, which means you can't replace it should something happen to it. The cups have very limited rear swivel. That's about as far as you can get, and I'm sort of bending the headband there. But the other direction is full sort of 90+ degrees, allowing you to lay the headphones flat. You can see the KiwiEars and Zeos branding there on the band. The ear pads have stereo indicators on the inside, which is cool, but there are no markings on sort of the outside of the headphone or on the inside of the headphone. You'd think they would be sort of here on these mirrored metal strips above the ear cups, but no, they're just mirrored metal strips. It makes me wonder if they should have been the stereo indicators and then they went through a design revision. Speaking of things that might have once served a purpose, if you open up the size adjustment here, one side is tighter than the other, but I'm sure that'll work itself out over time. You can see that there are little cable routing channels that are cut into the aluminum bars on either side of this headphone. And that makes me wonder if maybe this was originally supposed to be a single entry design, and then they modified it to dual 3.5 as it is currently, or if it was a maybe different cup design that they or headband design that they adopted from a different product that maybe didn't see the light of day. Either way, it's an interesting vestigial feature to look at. Other thing I will say is this adjustment is not indexed, which for someone like me who counts clicks to get a consistent fit is a bit of a bummer, but you can actually use the cable routing marks there as sort of a size indicator, which is what I've been doing while wearing these. While I have the arms fully extended, should not have put that one away, let's go ahead and look at the pivot on these cups. And so that is it. That's all you get in terms of up and down swivel. The range is extremely limited, and that will become important for comfort later on, and I'll talk about why later. Something that is good for comfort, however, are these ear pads. They are extremely soft and very plush. There's a very thick foam pad here on the inside between your ear and the drivers. I did try to take that foam out because I wanted to see what the sound would be like if you remove the foam from between your ear and the driver. Unfortunately, the foam pad here is integral to the structure of the ear pad. It sort of is sewn to the foam, and it goes around and is part of the ear pad structure itself, so it is non-removable. You can remove the memory foam padding, which is encouraging. You could potentially replace it down the line, but as far as removing this very thick foam pad here, that has to stay. While I have the cups off, or the pads off, we can look at the driver. It's a very Fostex-inspired looking driver, at least to me. Oh, one thing I did forget to mention, these ear pads are part of the reason that these headphones isolate pretty darn well. Not like ANC levels or like earmuff levels of isolation, but I would say up there with some of the more isolating closed back designs that I've tried. So these are up there in terms of how much they isolate. The only ventilation on these cups is these 5 little vents here at the top, which, as you can see, are kind of far away from where the driver is. And these pads are completely sealed, and they form a very nice seal on your head. So isolation is good. The build, when you put them on, you do hear some of that clicky-clacky when you're sort of moving around and walking with these. But the main sound that I got while wearing these was very prominent driver flex or planar crinkle. For those who haven't experienced it, it's very similar to the crinkly noise that you get with some unvented IEMs, and it's essentially caused by the same thing. When you put headphones on, you trap some air here between the driver and your head. That massive air can cause the driver to deform. With IEMs, happens with dynamic drivers. With headphones, the mylar plastic membrane on these planar drivers causes an audible crinkle. This is a common phenomenon on closed-back planars, as well as some electrostats. This has documented occurrences on closed-back planars from Hifiman, Fostex, Odyssey. The jury is still out on if this is a benign finding or if it's an early sign of driver failure. I have seen lots of people who are like, oh, my planars have crinkled since day one and they're 15 years old and sound perfect. And then I've also seen people that are like, my planar's crinkled since day one, the left driver died 2 weeks later. So this issue itself may or may not be a problem. However, Zeos is aware of an issue that after sustained use or even like 50, 60, 100 hours-ish of burn-in, the driver membrane here may relax so much that it will start bottoming out on deeper, more impactful bass notes and causing an audible, like clicking or groaning, like farty noise. This looseless or relaxation of the driver is probably related to the crinkle, as it would make sense that a looser membrane would crinkle more under pressure. In fact, on mine, the right one does crinkle more than the left one, which I think is interesting. Zeos offers 2 solutions to this problem. The first involves disassembling the headphone on both sides, undoing these 3 screws, popping out the drivers, and one by one loosening and then retightening the screws on the back of the magnet carrier for the drivers one by one. What that does is it allows the membrane to settle and then be retightened, hopefully eliminating the audible issues with bass notes and reducing the crinkle. Another thing it does, however, is change the tuning. In what way? I don't know. The other solution that he's considering doing is drilling holes sort of here or here where it's away from the driver and won't harm the performance of the driver, as well as sort of drilling holes in the sides of the pad to give more ventilation to the driver here. While I'm happy that these solutions exist and that he's sort of making us aware of them, the tinkerer slash modder in me is quite happy about it. I can just fix these myself. I can't help but think that the driver bottoming out after 50 to 100 hours of use might be a little bit of a design flaw. Planar crinkle happens. It's just a reality of the design of the driver. But when an Odyssey or other planar headphone starts to flex so much that it starts to affect a sound, that's a return, repair, or replace. I imagine KiwiEars is prepared to stand by these and offer to repair or replace failed units. But the only other comment I will say is that I do think these could have used a little more time in the oven to iron out the quirks of the driver to make it more resilient. At least that's the appearance to me. All right, let's go ahead and pull up these specifications for the Serene here. This is a rectangular planar driver that, as we saw, looks a bit like the Fostex drivers from the T50 or T60 series. Despite what early impressions or reviews of this headphone seem to say, these actually aren't all that hard to drive. My math says 11.23 milliamps at half a volt to hit 110 decibels at 1 kilohertz, which is honestly pretty easy to drive. To check my math, I pulled out my 5.5 gen iPod, and it had no problems getting these loud enough that it would cause hearing damage. So I don't think there's necessarily a reason for you to go out and buy an amp for these, but I'm not going to stop you from doing so. In terms of sort of weight, size, and comfort, these are nice and lightweight at 269 grams a piece, and even with the cable, you are still under 300 grams, which makes them great for travel use or sort of on the go. Clamp force is on the higher end, but it's not above 500 grams, which is sort of my marker for what I call a clampy headphone. The cups are small-ish, as you saw. Again, I'll talk about that in the comfort section. Overall, these are small, lightweight, very portable headphones, and being closed back, the isolation is good, so I can see these potentially becoming a travel headphone for some people. Let's go ahead and move on to the cool wall. Looks is always an area where I think Zeos has always excelled, at least in my opinion. All of his collabs have had some good style to them, which honestly I've enjoyed. The JoJo's, the Defiant, the red and blue version of the Z12s, all of those in my opinion look pretty sleek. These kind of fit in. The design is, sort of generic, but the touches of purple with these metal discs, and yes, these are metal, kind of gives them a little bit of a flair to them. Zeos has mentioned repeatedly that he's trying to get KiwiEars to do these in different colorways, so like purple or orange or red, and that I think would be pretty awesome. Color matching your gear is always a cool thing to be able to do, and if Zeos can pull that off, I think more power to him. I think these would look good in a whole bunch of different colors. Speaking of cool, that's where these will go. Well done, Zeos. These look pretty nice. Not super ostentatious or super incredible or anything, but for what they are, I think pretty good looking. But what will the Council of Ladies have to say about the looks here on the Serene? Well, it turns out these are pretty good looking. We have 3 votes for yes, a single meh, and another no, rounding things out quite nicely. As far as these starting conversations, the score flips to a 2 to 3 against the giving of compliments, so not interesting enough for the ladies to comment on them, but still rather cool looking. The purple metal discs do score some points, but there seems to be a lot of concern on how far the ear cups stick out of the head while being worn, which I have to say, something I've never really considered when assessing headphones, but apparently for at least 1 or 2 of the ladies, how sort of horizontal the ear cups are is apparently an important thing. That's why the ladies are here, folks. They focus on the actual important things in terms of looks. Comfort, I feel, is one of the Serene's strong points, but while it's genuinely comfortable to wear due to its lightweight and extremely squishy pads here, there are 1 or 2 issues for me. The main one is the limited pivot on these cups. While these very squishy pads absorb like 90% of the clamp force, when I'm wearing them, I do feel that more pressure is put on the sort of bottom part of my ears compared to the top. The fact that these cups are quite small means that they squish the bottom of my earlobes when they're worn. And while it isn't a massive issue, it really does start to bother me after like 2-3 hours of wear. Another thing that bothers me after 2-3 hours of wear is that these get pretty warm after extended listening sessions. That's not necessarily a problem with the Serene, it's a problem with essentially all closebacks that isolate well and have these sort of thicker, foamier pads. I am aware that you can just bend the headband to reduce the angle of the cups, but when I tried to do that earlier, you can see here on the ends, I heard a snapping noise and the band on mine started coming loose. So I'm either going to need to be more gentle with the bending or be more careful with it, because clearly the pad here maybe is user replaceable. As far as my wife goes, she actually gave these a score of pass on the second head test. She said they weren't anything amazing in terms of comfort, but they weren't uncomfortable either. She was essentially neutral on them. She was happy they weren't enormous, which for her was a nice win, and she had no issues with her ears fitting in these cups. One thing I will say is, these are comfy. Out of the box, they will need some adjustments for me or some other people, but that's doable. That's a thing with most headphones. The driver flex and the creaking from the build are two other things that I do find annoying, but again, at this price point and with this build quality, it's about expected. Before I get into the sound, I wanted to address some of the discussion that I've seen online on how the Serene is very revealing of not only source changes, but cable changes, with KiwiEars going as far as to claim on their website that, quote, the sensitive drivers used in the Serene can even detect slight audible differences in cable impedance, so you can essentially tune the final sound with the cable of your choice, end quote. So naturally, I threw a 15 and 30 ohm impedance adapter on these to see how the sound would change. Disappointingly, no change in the sound. Not just to my ears, but also to my measurement coupler here. Now, I should have known this. Planar drivers tend to have perfectly flat impedance curves, or mostly flat impedance curves. But just to be certain, I did graph the impedance of the Serene, and as you can see, it's flat. So you'll need more sensitive equipment than what I have to detect how the cable changes the sound here on the Serene. Up next, however, is the source change section, and well, same thing really. Besides things like my ESS DACs sounding a little bit sort of sharper than my Cirrus Logic DACs, I honestly didn't hear a change with the Serene across most of my testing sources, and that's a pretty wide gamut from sort of smaller, cheaper things to sort of more mainstream things. There was one exception to that, where not only could I hear a difference, but I could also graph the difference, and that was my X-Duo TA66. That is an output transformerless tube amp. It is using a cathode follower design for the power tube. What that means is not only does it have a much higher output impedance than a standard amp, but it also causes a capacitant high-pass filter effect with headphones like the Serene that have like 50-ish ohms of impedance. What this does, and I'll go ahead and pull up the graph, it rolls off the sub-bass, which in my book is an undesirable outcome. The TA66, however, regularly measures differently from all of my other amps because it is an OTL tube amp with a cathode follower design, and because of that high output impedance. So, in my admittedly limited experience with my 24 or so dongles, sources, amps, and whatnot, the Serene sounded essentially the same on all of them, with the only real noticeable change being on my OTL tube amp, which does that with most headphones. Unless your impedance is, 300-400-ish, which it does really well with, it will do a capacitive low-pass filter effect on headphones with this level of impedance. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about how the Serene actually sounds. Bass on the Serene, as you would expect from a Zeos creation, is rather excitable. These Fostex style drivers move a good amount of air, and the deep bass notes in low had plenty of energy and really nice dynamics. The bass isn't as fast or as articulate as I feel it can be on some other planars, but this is essentially a bass-ed EQ that has been pre-applied to a planar's stock tuning, which honestly is kind of nice. What isn't so nice is how that bass starts to become a little overwhelming as we cross sort of into the mid-bass. The punchiness here is fantastic, don't get me wrong, but that big bass drum and Uptown Funk starts to come across a little bit too thick for the track. It really starts to take over the tonality of the rest of the song, and it's a taste of things that are to come. Bass on the Serene is boosted to full-on bass head levels, which can be a good or a bad thing. It's all going to depend on how the mids shake out in the wash. Unfortunately, it seems that even though the Serene is a planar headphone, the lower mids Taxman has come to collect. Lower mids here are thick, soupy, and quite heavy sounding. This can have some pleasing effects with male vocals, but by contrast, other things just sound unnaturally muffled. The horns in Late in the Evening, for example, feel like they're sort of under a blanket, and the guitar just isn't anywhere near as forward or dynamic as I personally would like in this track. It feels like the bass riff and the drums are sort of coating everything in a thick layer of syrup, and it unfortunately extends up into female vocals as well. Cyndi Lauper in The Goonies Are Good Enough sounds like she's sort of sitting right in front of the drum kit rather than at the front of the stage. She's really having to fight the instrumentals, and her overall vocal tonality is unnaturally flat and sort of lifeless, really. It just doesn't have the energy that I think that this track should have. Mids then are quite a mixed bag. Male vocals can come across pleasantly husky and dark in some cases, but instrument separation, detail, and female vocals suffer quite a bit from that big bass energy, and I do get some masking going on here. Mids, clearly not the focus of this tuning. Part of what I think is making those female vocals sound so flat and lifeless is that the upper mids here are pretty attenuated. This can work pretty well if you boost the harmonics and you add some sparkle to the treble, but the Serene doesn't really do that. Marine's voice in Treasure Box just sounds like she's underwater with some of her lines. The energy and attitude to her voice is toned down a whole lot more than I would really prefer. There's no sibilance and no shoutiness, but the chorus of Treasure Box is supposed to be a excitable, bouncy, fun thing, and it just doesn't sound that way here on the Serene. Another reason for that is just the way the treble is presented. While it can have some decent sparkle with some cymbal harmonics, the overall effect sounds flat and sort of rolled off in the treble. It's kind of wonky. The tambourine in Lonely Rolling Star, for example, great energy, nice and sparkly. But the synths, the electric drum, the vocal harmonics, and the rest of the percussion suffers from really fast decay and harmonics that just come off as very dry. While there is a little sparkle in the treble, the upper mids and treble overall are quite flat and dry, which when you combine that with the boosted bass makes for, let's say, an interesting tuning. Technical performance here on the Serene is not really a strong point of it, at least in my opinion. I don't personally think that's due to the driver itself. I think it's more down to the tuning. The attack of the bass in Roughneck, for example, is just soft both on the attack and on the decay. Not really what I expect from a planar driver. The note is still resolved very well, the notes are still separated, and the resolution is honestly decent. It's just not as planar-like on the low end as I was expecting. And if it isn't planar-like on the low end, then it isn't planar-like on the high end either. As I was saying earlier, there is some sparkle in the treble, but it's very peaky and uneven. And that does affect the way that details are perceived here, at least in my ears. The background conversation in Waltz for Debbie was barely audible in some passages, which to me is an indication that the warmth has sort of crossed over from boosting the conversation into masking them up or muddying them over. The glassware hits were soft, lacking in energy. Every once in a while I would get one that sounded real crisp, but it's a very inconsistent sort of performance. Okay, I must admit, including the Serene here, I currently own 4 closed-back planars, and most of them will out-resolve and out-detail the Serene. If I had to compare them to the rest of them, I would say that the Serene here is closest to the Sundara closed-back in terms of overall technical performance. It was rather close between those two. Personally, I'm willing to call it a tie, but I did find that if you prefer mid-range details, the Sundara closed-back is the more resolving headphone. Being a isolating closed-back headphone, I wasn't expecting a ton in terms of perceived 3D soundstage or stereo separation, but honestly, it's pretty decent. Painted Black had nice separation between the left and right ears. The width of the track was pretty nice. It wasn't anything incredible, but it didn't have that sort of closed in-head sound that I can get on some other closed-back sets. The perceived 3D soundstage is average for closed backs, that is to say, nothing really special. Imaging on well-mastered tracks, however, is pretty solid. The bass guitar, the drums, the piano in Cousin Dupree are very easily placed in space, but the track sounds decidedly two-dimensional. It lacks the depth that I expect from this track. As I said earlier, this is not a bad performing headphone, especially considering the fact that the isolation performance is excellent and the fact that it is a closed back design, but I will say that it is average amongst closed backs. Okay, listening to KiwiEars' marketing and what Zeos has been saying about the Serene here, you would think that they would have solved the budget closed back planar puzzle. But in all honesty, I feel like quoting one of my favorite fictional engineers. I can't change the laws of physics. As I said earlier, I currently own 4 closed back planars, and most of them have tonal or timbral issues with their tuning. Most of them have odd-sounding female vocals, a wonky mid-range, or issues in the treble, or all of these things at once. How do those compare with the Serene? Well, I'll do an in-depth comparison with one of them, but real quick, let's bring in the other 2. And we'll start with the closed back planar that, in my opinion, doesn't have a lot of those issues that I just talked about. In fact, it's one of the best closed back headphones for the money that I've heard, in my opinion. It's the Dan Clark collab with Drop, the Aeon Closed X, priced at $500 US. The Aeon Closed X, as I mentioned, honestly avoids almost all the pitfalls of being a closed back planar. No crinkle here on my unit, no boomy bloated bass, no unnatural female vocals, no wonky mid-range. The treble is quite bright and will be fatiguing to some people, but that's a thing that happens to basically all planar headphones in general, not just this one. Dan Clark Audio put a lot of work into making the Aeon Closed X here sound basically as close to their open-backed counterparts as they could, and it shows. This is, in my opinion, one of the best closed-back headphones under like $500-600. In terms of sound quality, build, everything, it absolutely smashes the Serene in every way, but that's to be expected. This is 3 1/3 times more money than the Serene. However, there are good conditioned one of these selling for as low as $250 on the secondhand market. So if you want a closed back planar, personally, I would save up some extra cash and pick up a used one of these. Next, however, let's talk about my Fostex T60RP Anniversary Edition. First off, I know that these are semi-open. I see the grills there. These also have holes in the back. Both of these are more closed than they are open. These were between $300 and $400 when they were brand new, depending on where you shopped at, but these have been replaced by the Mark II recently and are no longer available. These do fall into a good amount of those planar pitfalls that I was talking about earlier. The female vocals here are wonky, but they are better than on the Serene because at least these have some harmonics to go with them to give some more energy to the vocals. In addition, while the T60 can be considered bassy, it's nowhere near as heavy or thick or syrupy as the Serene can be, meaning that the mids here come forward a bit more and the separation and clarity is much improved compared to the Serene. Again, this isn't really a fair comparison. The T60RP was at minimum twice the price of the Serene, but seeing as the driver on the Serene looks suspiciously like a reverse engineered driver from this or the T50, I thought that, this comparison was apt, especially if this is a sort of cost-reduced, reverse-engineered version of this driver. If you can find a used T60RP, I think that it's a much better listening experience than the Serene, but again, I don't know what the pricing for these is on the used market. Let's go ahead and start the real comparisons, and we'll start off with a headphone that honestly reminds me a lot overall of the Serene. These are the Hifiman HE-R9s, currently priced on Amazon for $90 US, or you can get a refurbished pair of these from Hifiman directly for $60. The bass performance on the Serene reminded me a lot of the boomy, overblown, thick with like 5 C's bass on the R9 here. Serene is actually more forward with female vocals and their harmonics, but the treble here is actually less engaging than on the more excitable R9. The Serene comes across a little bit more technical compared to the R9, but it's not by like a massive amount. Both of these have what I would consider roughly equal build quality. Both come with an absolutely Spartan accessories package. What I'll say is if you liked the way the R9 did bass, but you want something a little bit more controlled in the treble and honestly more comfortable, the Serene might work quite well for you. Next up, let's take a look at another closed back Hifiman set, the Sundara closed back, which has fallen in price all the way down to $150 new or $100 in refurbished condition. Now let's get this perfectly clear right from the start. Both of these have serious issues with their tuning. The Serene is boomy and muddy on the low end. The Sundara closed is just extremely wonky and unnatural sounding all across the shop. This has some real oddities with brass instruments and female vocals. They come across honky, nasal, and very boxy sounding. Despite all of the issues with the Sundara closeback, A being these two, I found myself preferring the Sundara closed for that slightly more spacious, more female vocal forward sound that it had compared to the bass forward, everything else shy sound here on the Serene. In terms of build quality, I do think the Sundara closed feel a bit more premium in build than the Serene. There are some mods available for this that I will be trying in the near future. I picked these up super cheap, so I got them as a modding test bed. That isn't to say that there won't be mods for the Serene trickling in. Zeos already talked about drilling holes in these. Personally speaking, if I was forced to buy a new closed back planar for 150-ish bucks, personally, I would go for the Sundara closed over the Serene. Serene is definitely more comfortable on my head. It's not by a huge amount, but it is more comfortable. I do think if I could put these pads on this would be equally as comfortable. But Omar, I like bass. And in fact, I like bass so much, I want a dynamic driver-based headphone. Okay, well, here's the Meze 99 Noir. It's their collaboration with Drop, priced $10 more than this at $170 US. Let's start with build quality. 99 Noir is just a massive leap ahead of the Serene. It also comes with a case, it comes with a cable that has a microphone included, and personally speaking, the 99 Noir is one of the most comfortable headphones I've ever worn. It's also every bit as isolating as the Serene is in terms of noise and environmental noise, so it's just as good as sort of shutting the world out and jamming out as the Serene is. In terms of sound, guess what? The 99 Noir, also very boomy and bassy and warm and dark sounding. That said, it is much more controlled, it is more detailed, and I find this even rumblier in the sub bass than the Serene. Vocals on the Meze are more forward, female vocal harmonics sound more natural, and while the 99 Noir isn't perfect in the treble, it does have a bit more consistent sparkle than the Serene does. Is this perfect? No, as I mentioned, it has that wonky treble tonality, and it has that slow, sort of syrupy character to the bass and lower mids that the Serene has, but it's less syrupy. This is like light syrup, while this is like full dark corn, molasses, okay? If you want this sort of warm, bass forward, like darker overall tonality, I just think the 99 Noir pulls it off way better than the Serene, with, in my opinion, better build, better comfort, better accessories, and most importantly of all, easy access to all the replacement parts you could ever need if something breaks. But let's say you want something a bit more balanced while still retaining some warmth. Well, my current recommendation for a closed back headphone under $200 is the $160 FiiO FT1. Much like the Mezes, this comes with a carry case in the package, which is quite nice. The build quality here isn't as sturdy as it is on the Meze, but I still think it beats the pants off of the Serene. Comfort on both of these honestly is about the same. This pinches the bottom of my earlobe, fixable by probably bending the headband. This headband is disappointing, fixable by, a capper strap. So I would say about even. Sound, however, is an area where things really diverge between these two. You could make the argument that the FT1 here is the best sounding headphone that we've looked at today, and that includes the Aeon X Closed, especially if you prefer a sort of warmer sound compared to the sparkly brightness that is the Aeon Closed X. The FT1 has really nice bass. It isn't as boomy as on the Serene, but it feels tighter and higher quality. The mids here are more forward, they're better separated, they're more detailed. Female vocals actually vaguely sound how they're supposed to, and the treble has some decent energy to it. It can be a little over energetic if you're sensitive in the upper reaches of the treble, but overall, I will say I think the FT1 is an absolutely fantastic headphone, and in terms of sound quality, it punches way above its weight compared to other closed backs. If you really like that big, boomy texture to the lower mids, then Serene will 100% give you that. But personally speaking, the FT1, seeing as both of these are the same price, would be my pick every single time. Let's do a real quick wrap up. If you are looking for a closed back headphone under 500 bucks, the FT1 here and the Aeon Closed X should be at the top of your list. If you want a very technical, bright, snappy, plucked sort of sound, the Aeon Closed X is fantastic. If, on the other hand, you want a warmer, more musical sound, go for the FT1. If you find that the FT1 isn't bassy enough for you, and you're willing to go darker and sacrifice some tonality and some timbre, the 99 Noir is superbly comfortable, well-built, and has replacement parts readily available. If you want even more bass than this, and you want all the consequences that come with it, then the HE-R9 at its new budget price can be some really stupid fun on the cheap. There's even mod kits available for it. Maybe I'll go over those someday. I do have one installed on a second one that I bought because these are so cheap. But what if you have to have a planar at this price point? Well, you have two options. You could forego bass impact for what is a cleaner, more resolving, but still extremely tonally awkward and very timbrally compromised sound with the Sundara closed back. Or you can go for the Serene, which basically is an HE-R9, but with some of the issues being less severe, because I'm not going to say fixed. Of these two, it's a bit of a toss-up based on what you prioritize. If you prefer mids and treble, go Sundara. If you prefer bass, go Serene. Comfort, I think, is a toss-up. It's mostly down to the pads, but I do think the Serene is a bit more comfortable, but the Sundara has a, sturdier build. Yeah, it's a toss-up between these two if you have to have a planar, and you can't afford a set of these. So, where does that leave the Serene on the Audio Amigo arbitrary rating scale? Well, first off, what I want to do is say that I have a ton of respect for Zeos. What he has done for the community, I think, is super important. He serves as a first point of contact for a lot of people, and having met him in person, I think that he's a very great, friendly guy who comes across as very genuine. He has talked a lot about how much he likes this headphone, and I know there will be a lot of people who will like this headphone. People who enjoy the HE-R9, for example, I think will really like this. It's more comfortable, less crazy looking, and in my opinion, slightly better sounding than the HE-R9. Speaking as a reviewer, however, it's very difficult for me to justify the purchase of these when the 99 Noir and the FT1s exist. If you absolutely have to have a closed back planar, well, honestly speaking, you're much better off saving up another $100 or so for a used Aeon Closed X as opposed to getting a Serene. But what will sort of seal the fate of the Serene is what happened to me towards the end of writing this review during my A-B comparisons. As I was wrapping up testing, listening to these, I got a bit of a slappy, staticky, farty noise coming out of my right ear cup here. And suddenly, my bass response was lopsided. Listening to big, deep bass notes, everything was leaning to the left. The left ear cup was suddenly much louder in the bass compared to the right. The left was just much more prominent with bass compared to the right. So I did the usual things. Swapped the cable, didn't fix it. Swapped the position of the headphone, didn't fix it. I played with some mono tracks. Yep, definitely unbalanced. Once I was certain that these were imbalanced, I went ahead and stuck it on my new measurement rig, and would you look at that? Now, before you say anything, these are averages of 5 consistent runs after I got the seal on the text fixture right. These are not single run results. I was lifting and replacing the headphones on the fixture between each run until I got 5 consistent runs one after the other. I will be doing the Zeos 22 screw fix to this to see if that fixes it. But I'm filming this the day before these actually come out and are released for sale. And I got to get packed and get going to CanGem Dallas. So those fixes will have to wait. For now, I am very sad to be putting the KiwiEars X Z Reviews Serene in the meh tier. The comfort and the amount of fun you can have with the bass on these will keep it out of a sort of trash tier recommendation, but it will also seriously limit who I think should be buying these. These are super specialist headphones, and in my opinion, compared to the standard closed back recommendations at this price range, things like the 99 Noir, the FT1, the Serene just isn't competitive. I guess that kind of spoils my recommendation segment a bit, but let's go ahead and get into it anyway. Who do I think should buy the KiwiEars X Zeos Serene? Well, if you are a person who bought the Hifiman HE-R9 and you really, really enjoyed it, and you want a slightly less dark sound with better female vocals, Serene, I think, could be an option for you. In addition, if you absolutely have to have a closed back planar and saving up for a used pair of Aeon Closed X is out of the question, and you already tried and did not like the Sundara closed back, then, Serene, I think, is worth a shot. Next up, if you're one of those people who collect all of Zeos's collabs, you've probably already bought the $1 coupon from Linsoul, and your order's probably already placed. But finally, and then I think this is what I'm going to do with my pair here, if you're a modder, these come apart with 3 screws, and there's really nothing stopping you from ripping whatever foam or other tuning things they have in here out and trying out your own sort of tuning and experimentation with these drivers. So have at it. If the screw fix doesn't fix mine, that's probably what I'm going to do. Outside of those groups of people, however, I would highly recommend that you seek out the FiiO FT1 or the Meze 99 Noir at this price point, depending on how dark you want your tonality to be. And if you want a planar that and it has to be closed back, please, please, please save up for a used Aeon X closed. I promise you, it's worth it. So it is with great apologies to KiwiEars, Linsoul, and especially great YouTube chef Zeos that this wraps up my review of the Serene. I'm going to close my review with a quote and paraphrase, this time from one of my favorite YouTube reviewers. It was experimental. Sure, it didn't work, but that's what experimentation is for. Maybe the next closed-back affordable planar will be a revolutionary diamond-farting wonder. I, for one, was happy to be a part of the scientific process. End quote. Next videos you'll see from me are the ones I filmed just before taking off to CanJam, and as soon as I get back, my 11/11 videos and buyer's guides will be my top priority, so keep an eye out for those. As usual, massive, massive shout out to all of my Compadres Club members. Remember, $5 a month, you get to decide what I review with your money, and you help make the channel more independent and less reliant on samples and tours, which I really appreciate. Really hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you have a great rest of your day. This has been Omar with Audio Amigo Reviews, and I'll catch y'all next time.